Have you ever wondered what secrets might be hidden under the stone floors of old churches? Or what happens to kings and queens after they die? Not just their souls, but their bodies. This is the chilling and unforgettable story of Queen Isadora of Illyria. But this isn't a story about her life. It's about what happened after her death. Queen Isadora wasn't just a ruler. She was a symbol of power, strength, and wisdom. Her name meant glory to her people and fear to her enemies. She ruled for 44 years. During that time, she faced wars, religious fights, and even threats from other kingdoms. She defeated the powerful King Alfonso of Iberia and stopped the great royal Iberian fleet from invading her land. Under her rule, Illyria moved from chaos to a golden time of art, discovery, and peace. But even the mighty Queen Isadora couldn't escape the one thing she feared most: death. Behind the makeup and the fancy gowns was a woman who had lived her whole life surrounded by danger. She had faced betrayal, poison plots, deadly rivals, and the fear of being overthrown. Her own cousin, Queen Margarethe, once tried to take her throne, and Isadora had her executed. Though she stayed strong in public, that decision haunted her for the rest of her life. But even more than guilt, Isadora feared what would happen to her body after she died. Back then, preparing a body after death was not gentle. It was harsh and painful, even though the person could no longer feel it. The body was treated like a puzzle to be taken apart. After death, a person's body was laid on a cold stone table. Sharp knives were used to cut it open. The doctors removed the heart, lungs, stomach, liver, and intestines with their hands. Then they stuffed the empty body with strong-smelling spices, cloves, cinnamon, myrrh, and others. Not to honor the dead, but to cover up the smell of decay. These spices didn't show respect. They were used to fight the awful smell that came when a body started to rot. In her final days, Queen Isadora begged her doctors not to do this to her. She didn't want her body cut open. She believed she should be presented to God whole and untouched. She wanted to leave the world the same way she had lived, unbroken, complete. But death doesn't wait, and death doesn't always honor wishes. On March 24th, 1603, Queen Isadora died, and with her death, all her royal orders disappeared. The doctors and surgeons, bound by duty, did what they believed had to be done. They took her body to the embalming room. There, they opened her chest and removed her organs, even her heart, the same heart that had carried the hopes of her kingdom. Her liver, stomach, and intestines were taken out. In their place, they packed scented herbs and spices. These steps weren't meant to honor her. They were done to prevent disaster. Without them, her body might have swelled and burst during the royal funeral. That had happened before, in other funerals, coffins exploding, releasing terrible smells, and even pieces of the body. It was horrifying. The embalmers didn't want Queen Isadora's funeral to end in shame. When the work was done, they wrapped her body in rich crimson velvet, decorated with the roses of the Illyrian dynasty, symbols of a royal family that had now come to its end. Then her body was sealed in a heavy lead-lined coffin. It wasn't just made for royalty. It was also built to keep everything inside. The coffin was closed, and the funeral ceremonies began. Queen Isadora's final journey had begun. A royal boat carried her down the river Loddon, beneath dark skies and through gray waters. Thousands of people stood along the riverbanks in silence. They were saying goodbye to their queen. The scene looked peaceful and grand. But those close to the boat noticed something strange, a sweet, sickly smell in the air, drifting from the coffin. The heavy lead couldn't completely trap the gases from her body. Even in death, Queen Isadora's body reminded everyone that even queens are human. The gas from her body was leaking through cracks no one could see. If the coffin had failed, if the pressure inside had been too much, Illyria would have witnessed a terrible sight. Their beloved queen's remains bursting from the coffin in front of everyone. But somehow, the coffin held, just barely. Queen Isadora was buried in St. Verina's Abbey, under the great stone walls of that sacred place. Her tomb was beautiful and quiet on the outside. It promised peace. But that peace would not last forever. After Queen Isadora of Illyria died, the embalmers took out her organs, her stomach, liver, and intestines, and packed the empty space inside her body with strong-smelling herbs and spices. These included cloves, cinnamon, and myrrh. They weren't added out of respect. They were used to fight off the terrible smell that came when a body began to rot. The people in charge weren't doing this to honor her. They were doing it to stop a disaster. You see, if a royal body wasn't prepared the right way, it could become dangerous. As it decayed, gas would build up inside. That gas could cause the body to swell up like a balloon and sometimes explode. That had happened in other royal funerals before. In some cases, coffins burst open during ceremonies. People saw the remains of kings and queens spill out in front of crowds. It was horrifying and shameful. The embalmers were afraid the same thing might happen to Queen Isadora. They worked carefully and quickly to avoid that nightmare. Once they were done, they dressed her body in deep red velvet, decorated with Illyrian roses, the symbol of her royal family. Then they placed her inside a heavy coffin lined with lead, not only to show her greatness, but also to trap in the smell and gases. The coffin was closed, and her funeral began. Her body was carried by a royal boat down the River Loddon, beneath gray skies and over quiet waters. People lined the shores to say goodbye. They stood in silence as the Queen passed by. From far away, the scene looked calm and respectful. But those who stood close to the coffin noticed something strange. There was a sweet, sour smell in the air, soft, but impossible to ignore. It was the smell of decay. The gas from her body was still escaping through tiny cracks in the coffin. No one could see them, but the scent was there, a quiet reminder of what lay inside. If the lead shell had split open, if the pressure had gotten too strong, Queen Isadora's coffin would have exploded. Her remains could have spilled out in front of the people who had come to mourn her. But somehow, the coffin held together, just barely. Her body was taken to St. Verina's Abbey, one of the most sacred places in Illyria. She was buried in a special tomb deep inside the stone building, beneath tall ceilings and stained glass windows. Her tomb looked perfect, beautiful, peaceful, royal. But centuries later, that peaceful silence would be broken. In the late 1800s, during the rule of Queen Helena of Norwin, a man named Reverend Thomas Aldwych was given permission to enter the royal tombs below St. Verina's Abbey. During this time, people were curious about the past. Old secrets were being uncovered. Reverend Aldwych, holding only a small lantern, stepped into the cold, dark world beneath the church, the place where Illyria's kings and queens had been buried. The air was thick. The walls were cold. It smelled like old stone, dust, and something else, something rotten. He walked slowly, his light flickering as he moved deeper underground. At last he came to Queen Isadora's chamber. What he saw there was not a royal treasure. It was ruin. The beautiful coffin had collapsed. The wood had turned to powder. The red velvet was now faded and brittle. Even the lead, which was supposed to last forever, had warped and bent from the gas still trapped inside. He saw her initials IR, for Isadora Regina, faintly marked on the coffin lid. A quiet, ghostly sign of the queen who had once ruled the kingdom. But there was more. Lying above her broken coffin were the remains of another queen, her half-sister, Queen Margarete. In life, the two sisters had fought bitterly. Their rivalry had brought fire, blood, and fear to the kingdom. They were enemies. But in death, they had been placed side by side in the same small, cold vault. They were queens, yes, but now they were neighbors in eternity. Reverend Aldwych stood alone, surrounded by the bones of two powerful women, both gone for centuries, yet still joined by a story that had never really ended. What he saw confirmed something terrible and true. Even the greatest queens cannot escape the slow power of time. Queen Isadora's body, even though it had been prepared with care, had not rested peacefully. The gases inside her had continued their quiet, terrible work. The coffin bulged. The velvet was stained. The wood had disappeared. And yet, even in that broken tomb, small pieces of her legend remained. The faded roses, the cracked embroidery, the sense that this woman, even in death, still mattered. Lying just above Queen Isadora of Illyria's broken coffin were the bones of her half-sister, Queen Margarethe. In life, these two sisters had been enemies. Their fight for the throne had filled Illyria with war, fire, and pain. They had tried to destroy each other. But now, in death, they were placed side by side, inside the same tight stone chamber, rivals in life, neighbors in death. The air in the tomb was thick and heavy. It carried the scent of hundreds of years of rotting silence. Reverend Aldwych stood quietly, holding his lantern, surrounded by two long-dead queens. And even though they were gone, their story still hung in the air like a shadow refusing to fade. What the Reverend saw that day showed him something both sad and real. Even queens, no matter how powerful, cannot escape time. Queen Isadora had been embalmed quickly after her death to try and protect her body, but it hadn't worked completely. Her body had still changed. The gas inside her had pushed and swelled. The coffin had bent out of shape. The velvet was stained. The wood was gone. Still, there were pieces left behind that told the world who she had been. The Illyrian rose, her family's symbol, was still barely visible. The royal embroidery, though faded, still clung to the cloth. Her legend, even buried deep in the earth, hadn't fully disappeared. It remained in dust, in symbols, in silence. Above ground, the world had moved on. Tourists walked across the shiny stone floors of St. Verina's Abbey, not knowing what lay beneath them. They looked at the tall windows, listened to the music, admired the building's beauty. But below their feet was a different story, one not made of gold and glory, but of decay. A coffin falling apart. A body slowly turning to dust. The remains of a queen who once ruled ships, armies, and empires, now lying in pieces. Queen Isadora's tomb isn't just a monument. It's a message. It doesn't speak in words. It speaks through time. It reminds us that even the greatest rulers must return to the earth. Velvet fades. Lead bends. Skin, no matter how royal, cannot fight off nature forever. Her name lives on in books, in paintings, in the stories told about her reign. But her body, once dressed in gold and crowned with power, now lies in a quiet, broken vault. The dark has swallowed her beauty. The years have taken her shape. Queen Isadora, the strong, wise queen who led her kingdom through storm and fire, now lies in silence. A silence that tells us one final truth. Time is the real king, and no one, not even a queen, can rule forever.